Hi, it's Maria, and I'm doing another Maria Unfiltered, and this video series you will love it. It's Forgiveness to Love, my life exposed here. And so I've been wanting to do this for a very long time, and I just didn't have the courage. And so finally, I am doing it, and I'm really excited to share it with you. And so I'll start. And so sometimes, we go beyond. We must go beyond. We must go further than we ever imagined. And it's when it's that last drop that pushes us over the edge where we must speak up. And that's exactly where I am. And so very many times. And so in this Forgiveness to Love series, My Life Exposed, I share with you things that I have been going through that I just couldn't speak about before. Things that will shock you. Yes, things that will upset you. Things that will deeply sadden you and affect you. Because not only do they seem unbelievable, because they were unbelievable to me, but to some degree, you've felt that much pain. I know you have. And so I must tell you that it is with dignity and honoring my path that I share my story with you. And I want you to have dignity as you share your path, because there is no right or wrong here. We are here to experience life. We are here to experience the gamut of life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and sometimes the very, very ugly. And I don't mean to sound trite by this, but I want us to embrace our stories. I want us to embrace our pain. I want us to embrace our success. Um, our successes, because there are certainly many successes that we have all had as we negotiate our way and navigate our way through each and every day. And so, for years I have felt victimized by those who didn't want me to speak up, much less share my truth, by those who committed crimes left, right, and center, and then sued me when I finally gathered the confidence to reach out and finally admit that I had been in fear, that it was fear that was holding me hostage, and that ultimately compelled me to speak my truth. And so I experienced like a threefold strategy. And I'm so glad that God kind of helped me put that in those terms, because everything was so discombobulated. Uh, I had to kind of compartmentalize them. And so there was financial strangulation, as many of you have experienced. And that was evidenced by the thieving of my home and all my resources. And then there was the physical strangulation, which was the stalking and the intimidation and the torture and the poisoning of my world. Yes. And then there was the emotional strangulation. And that was where everyone and everything in my life um, was so horrible that I would lose all connection, all human connection, to ultimately leave me derailed, defamed, shunned, isolated, and all alone. And I just didn't accept that fate, because I knew that there was an alternate reality that I just needed to figure out a way to tap into. And I know that, you're probably like, oh, what is she talking about? But you'll see. You know what? We're all residents of planet Earth, right? And so Earth is one of a gazillion planets, right? In a gazillion universes out there. And so, how can we feel that we are so special and so different from any other life forms? What we do know is that we're a young planet, yes, where human beings are evolving. and they're seeing the darkness of their ways and feeling the pain of misdirected choices involving misdirected people, right? And so, in my solitude, and I've spent a lot of time in my solitude, I yearned to know what God had in store for me. And when I saw that the darkness came at me from every angle, and it appeared that no one was above being bought, and that nothing was uh, beyond being accomplished, it was just one jaw dropping event of terror after another that defied all sensibilities. And so I wondered why. Like, why was this happening to me? Because here I was just a woman who loved to love, a woman who loved to learn. I love to learn medicine and law and psychology and spirituality more than anything. Yes. And a woman who loved people and children and my parents and my friends and my family. And so I found my nourishment, in being around others, especially when my body had been so poisoned that food had become the enemy. Because, I was the woman in the bubble. Yes, I had severe, severe food and environmental allergies. Um, And in fact, if you think about what is an environmental allergy, well, it's one's environment is so toxic that one actually feels allergic to it, right? And so there's a histamine response. And so your body just can't handle it, and you go into overdrive. And um, and so I became allergic to everything. And it was called a universal reactor, actually, because my world was so toxic and I was terrified of everything, and justifiably so, I might add. And physicians, I went to medical centers all over the country, and twice I went to the Mayo Clinic, and they weren't sure that I was actually going to recover. But in any event, I was plagued with health issues involving my parents and my children and my family, where my children were literally ripped from my arms, and the doors to my home were locked. So, without clothes and a bed and even tampons, yeah, and a toothbrush, I was left to wander the streets of the ghetto. And so, as I reflect on how to move forward when every door seemed to shut in my face, notwithstanding the huge steel Greyhound bus door that actually shut on my face and head, leaving me in the aftermath of a traumatic brain injury that wasn't too long ago, where I was stuttering, and I had little recall of even yesterday's events. And so, as if I hadn't already experienced life in 3 different homeless shelters. And then 6 years later, I was still disabled to the point of being relegated to living in a car for 9 months. And so let me tell you, and that car was a car that had been tampered, and that car was overheating, it was rumbling, and it was, I believe, ready to explode with me in it. And so I wondered why. Why did I deserve this hell on earth existence? And so maybe mm, maybe the operative word is, why did I deserve it? I didn't deserve it, as in deserve, yet why had I attracted it? Because why was I living it? And so my world had unraveled. And so I saw myself as the wealthiest homeless person on the planet. And yet that means nothing, right? You can't take that to the bank. I also saw myself as a soul that was here to evolve. And so, quite honestly, I wasn't even sure what that meant. And so, in this so called real world, where I was pondering um, my relationship to the Matrix and what did that even mean? And so, not only did I seek advice from attorneys, but I also sought counsel from various law enforcement agencies and government agencies as to how to best protect myself when I had been held captive in an exceedingly abusive marriage and an even more abusive divorce. And I know that sounds strange, doesn't it? Yet for many of us, that is exactly how things roll. And so thank God now for all the internet sites now exposing the narcissist and narcissistic personality disorder, where the sense of entitlement, yes, exploits others, while the criminals feel no shame and no guilt, and rather kind of blow up like those, you know, silly but kind of cute blowfish, but human blowfish aren't cute. And so the name of that game was all about delay, 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 because in fact, the longer they could keep us bound in legal brouhaha, then the sooner they'll win, because they keep possession of our resources and that don't belong to them, right? And so it's the strategy of the narcissist, who's known to gaslight and blame and master manipulate everyone and everything around them, including the legal system, with an added bonus of controlling our lives and keeping us stuck in their really dysfunctional web. And so they threaten us and create a hostile and even a violent world where we're held captive. So you see, I'm no stranger to litigation. For not only did I attend law school and gave birth to 3 baby boys during my time there, but I was married to someone who basically told me on my honeymoon that he didn't like women and that he married me for my father's money. And so, why that was so weird was because he actually knew the size of my parents' fortune, as he had kind of wormed his way into being my dad's kind of quasi stockbroker for to get all the inside info. And my dad trusted him. And so then the strategy, as he, so clearly explained to me, was that he was going to file lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit if I should dare leave him. And so I just didn't get it, because I started getting sick. And my doctors and I couldn't figure out why. Plus, at times I felt tortured. I felt poisoned, because shortly after eating, I would feel really, really nauseated. I felt terrified, and I felt totally alone. And so I stayed in a marriage from hell because I was afraid to leave. Now, I'm not alone. As a woman who has stayed in a bad relationship. And I'm not alone as a human being who has stayed in a bad relationship, because men certainly have found themselves feeling stuck and feeling trapped. Um, and yet, finally, I mustered the courage and I prayed. And after 16 years of being continually threatened, in 1996, I dared leave the insanity. And here we are, 25 years later, and maybe 7 or so years after his death, due to his making good on threats of endless lawsuits to harass, bully, and destroy me with more perjury than you can possibly imagine. I stand before you as a woman whose parents left her over $50 million. Yet, due to lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, and this ridiculous legal strategy to thieve all my assets, including even the pittance I received from my marital estate, because I was told that millions were actually forever hidden offshore from me. Yes, so even with this vast inheritance, um, all was ravaged, and I was left traumatized, defamed beyond all sensibility. humiliated, broke, homeless, and even childless. Yes. So uh, I started walking the ghetto. And in case I should pass a steel barred window in the Long Beach ghetto where I had sought shelter in 2014 and catch a glimpse of the reflection of a woman who at one time had the world in the palm of her hand. Yes, I was barely recognizable to even my alter ego. I kid you not. And so, sadly, I want you to know about the specifics of the litigation that I hear was the subject of a Hallmark or Lifetime movie. I don't know which, I never saw it. Because the details are simply unavailable for public examination, much less scrutiny, because it was all so nicely sealed and hidden, quite contrary to public policy. But who cares, right? And because I spent more than 10 years writing over 5,000 pages, condensed into two huge novels titled Pleadings From Mansion to Morgue or Riches to Rags, I wanted to so accurately document a most unbelievable and quite fantastic story. Truly, I spent thousands of dollars on certified court transcripts that filled over a dozen large lateral file cabinets in the home office of my Clearwater Beach condo that my father bought for me in 2004 when he welcomed me there when I had decided to leave Chicago. So as I reflect on my life, charmed it has been truly, if not beyond amazing, for what I have seen, what I've heard, and what very few are gifted, if not survive, to share. So, there was one thing I was going to also mention to you. I wanted just to reiterate the fact that I saw myself as a soul who was experiencing all of these various circumstances and situations for the expansion of my soul. So although we can hold on to this victim mentality and say, oh, this is horrible, I took it from a different perspective because I saw that my soul was expanding and that who else and how else, as this woman who was, kind of sheltered in this huge mansion with all these, wonderful friends and things in a very social type lifestyle, how was I ever going to experience the things that I experienced as a homeless person? I mean, there was just no way. And then to experience more litigation than you can possibly imagine, where I kid you not, when I was on that witness stand for years, actually, the divorce trial, I shall tell you, um, there were over 400 court dates. That's more than an entire year, including Saturdays and Sundays, that we had court dates. There were, I think, over 30 attorneys. It cost millions of dollars. There were probably 50 experts. There were, what else can I tell you? I mean, there were all kinds of psychiatric experts, and there were therapists, and there were real estate experts, and there were, I mean, you name it. There were appraisers, and there were, house appraisers and jewelry appraisers, and this and that, and we just kept funding the legal system. But I have to tell you that there's just no way that I would have ever had the breadth and the depth of my experiences had I lived the kind of nice, calm life that I had foreseen for myself, and that I could have had the perfect family had I not had a crazy husband. But I loved my children, and he traveled a lot. So the children and I really had a very good life together because we were always together, and we'd have, on a Friday night, if I didn't have a dinner to go to, we'd all be in blue jeans sitting on the floor of the family room, and we'd be watching, we'd be playing Monopoly, or we'd be doing something else. Oh, something showed up on my camera. Sorry. So anyway, let me just, I digressed. I do apologize. Maybe it's the brain injury, or maybe it's just Maria. But anyway, Chicago was my home, and I loved Chicago. I took my first breath at Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's, where my dad was an OBGYN resident. And so we lived with my maternal grandparents, and my mother's two unmarried brothers in a large 3-flat just across the Indiana state line in Gary. And so you may be thinking, okay, well, she has the most incredible story you've ever heard, but why is she talking about her growing up? Well, the reason I am bringing this up is because, we all handle life's crises differently. And it all boils down to how we learn to handle situations during childhood. And so I want you to see how the way you were raised influences the choices you've made for your life right now. And so my life actually makes perfect sense when you get a feel for how I was raised and what was important to me. And so then it does make sense. And so anyway, here we go. So back to Gary. And you go, Gary? Are there white folk in Gary? You ask. Well, at one time, Gary was quite the place, notwithstanding the Music Man and the Jackson Five. And you see, Horseman High School, where I attended 7th and 8th grade, was quite the middle class, if not upper middle class, predominantly Jewish, doctors, lawyers, and businessmen owning kind of stately, brick Tudors, English Tudor homes, little estates with manicured gardens. And I remember one home had this lovely little brick wishing well in the front yard, and I always thought that was just so classy. But that was all well and good. Gary was all well and good until such time as the school Horseman gained notoriety as the national pilot for desegregation. And then all hell broke loose. And it ultimately became known as, what do you call it? Clapboard City? Plywood City? I don't know. Anyway, I think it's when all the windows are broken, and so they put up boards so that, like little kids can't fall out the window, or they don't get cut on all the glass. Anyway, there were 3 buses that were filled with inner city kids that made their way to a most inhospitable destination. Yes. The children simply didn't want to be there any more than those that were already enrolled wanted them there, right? And the dress code was abolished in favor of, like, some people wore bikinis, and the girls were wearing these oversized hoop earrings, that for some were ceremoniously ripped from their virgin ears. And so within weeks, panic broke out, and brass knuckles and weapons found their way into the backpacks of some students. And so then there was this air of terror that overtook many an adolescent, both black and white. And so my mother actually found a note in our mailbox from a boy who wrote that he wanted to rape me. And so you can imagine, she gave it to my dad. My dad immediately started looking into Eastern boarding schools so that he could get me as far the hell away as he could. But I just said I wasn't going to go. So then he decided on St. Mary's of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana, which was just an hour away. But there was no way I was going to be sent there either. So my dad, like many others, like his other doctor partners, they sold our house for pennies. So I think he sold it for like $30,000 or something just to be rid of it. And so off to the Indiana farmland we went. And I attended a school called Merrillville High School. And it was kind of in the boonies. And it's not the boonies anymore because it was built up. But when I first started going there were like cows and everything, and that was, I've always kind of considered myself a city girl. But so there, yeah, there were cows and stuff, and it was fun. I kind of waved to them from the window, and they probably thought, "Who is that nut?" But anyway, I was the only female that was allowed to take freshman chemistry, and I graduated at the top of my class. And so from there, I had my pick of any university from coast to coast, pretty much. And so I was actually one of the first women accepted to Notre Dame because it was an all male school. And I loved my Uncle George, who was the most cerebral man I have ever known. And he was a real life genius. Um, he was like a child genius, actually, too. And he was a professor of mathematics there and the chairman of his department. And I loved my Uncle George so much that I gave away my spot because he and I were so close that I didn't want to create any issues with his own family. Because you see, along with smaller photos of his wife and two children on his dresser was a large picture of a 3 or 4 year old Maria. And so I have never had as close and as loving a connection with anyone as I have had with this brilliant and gentle man. And so he was fluent in a number of languages, and he knew classical music and opera like the back of his hand. And he had a photographic memory. And he was the most glorious soul I have ever encountered. And so he had boundless compassion that colored his every interaction. And so, they say how some little girls want to marry their daddy. Well, my dad, was tall and attractive and a rather professional, kind of French or German looking man, despite his 100% Greek ancestry. And he had a full hair of kind of wavyish, brownish hair. Well, my Uncle George, on the other hand, was the quintessential absent-minded professor. And he had this full head of floppy, straight black hair that would fall into his eyes. And he'd be forever like flicking it from his face. And it was the cutest thing you ever saw. And he had dark horn-rimmed glasses that gave him an air of sophistication and set him apart from the crowd. And that was my idea of like the perfect man, and he was nerdy and he had a great big smile, that made you want to just jump on his lap and hug him like a teddy bear. And so he had the answer to any question I could ever ask. And for over 4 decades, we kind of telepathically communicated because when I would pick up the phone to call him, guess who'd be on the other end? Yes, he'd be dialing me. And so he'd look at me and I would immediately know what he was thinking. And so together with my mom, we suffered through countless holiday dinners until the others left or went to bed. And then the three of us would begin to assemble a jigsaw puzzle, like one of those that had like 1,000 or 5,000 or I don't know how many pieces. But because he had a photographic memory, he knew exactly what piece went where. I mean, it was so embarrassing to do anything around him because everything was so easy for him. Anyway, we'd stay up until the sun came up, and then our cheeks would hurt in the morning because we would be laughing so hard. So, when I think of my very own guardian angel that walks beside me on the planet, I know that it's my Uncle George who hovers over me and bathes me in divine love. And so, you know, to this day, he's my personal hero. And in fact, as a 3-year-old, I announced to my family that I was changing my name. Yes, I changed my name to Maria Haiti, George Colettus Jr. And the entire family found that very amusing, especially when we all realized that it was rather prophetic because I ended up marrying a man whose name was Scott George. So I got part of what I wished for. My name was Maria Haiti George. So I did. I got the George somehow. Anyway, you know what? I've shared a lot of this information with you right now. And so, and I have a lot more coming up that's really meaty. But I wanted to kind of set the stage and show you a little bit about who some of us are, the dichotomy of our experiences is extreme because we can say, oh, yes, we're homeless, or we've lost everything, or oh, they've ripped our children from us, or they're trying to do this to us, or they're stalking us, or people want to say, oh, she's delusional, or she's not all there, and of course, in divorce, it's all about the women being labeled nuts and sluts, and the men being labeled pedophiles, and that is just so horrific. But it's an easy label, right? And so anyway, I want you to see the humanity of all of us, because there's so much more to our story than the facts. And so when you hear about, your the favorite birthday parties you had, or your favorite vacation, or your first love, or your favorite hobby. Maybe you love to knit, or maybe you love to fish, or, and you caught like this most amazing fish. And so, anyway, we all have a story. And it's so much more than the facts of what has happened to us. And so I really wanted to share that with you. And so in the next video, I'm going to share with you some shocking revelations. And so let's take a moment to digest some of this and know that in part 2, you will be amazed by what you hear. And so without a moment to spare, I'll see you there. And just remember, I love you.